This could be the superfood that saves your life during the next crisis. It's probably the most nutritious food on earth that requires absolutely no refrigeration. This superfood was invented during the Cold War. In order to survive a possible nuclear attack, America needed a new kind of bunker food. The requirements were very daunting. This new superfood had to be extremely nutritious, incredibly cheap, easily reproducible on a massive scale, and long-lasting without refrigeration. After 5.5 years and hundreds of failed experiments, one military scientist finally cracked the food code. It was called the Doomsday Ration, and its recipe was kept secret for decades. With it, you could keep an adult well-fed for just 37 cents a day. Our government ended up stockpiling huge amounts of Doomsday Rations in shelters all across the country for a war that never came. But this food didn't spoil, and it was eventually put to good use. Over 150,000 tons worth of Doomsday Rations were unearthed and sent for emergency relief all over the world. Even today, more than 60 years later, full boxes are being discovered from time to time. They're still completely edible.
They still look fine!
Oh my god.
They taste like matzos.
Really?
Yeah, they're good.
But this is just one of the 126 survival foods that you can find in the Lost SuperFoods. In this book, you will discover not just the recipes of this long-lasting food, but full instructions with pictures as well as long-term storage and nutritional values. Today, I would like to share with you the one ingredient you need to make your own Doomsday Rations, but also some other powerful lost foods that you will find in this book. But first, let me tell you why you should even listen to me in the first place. My name's Art Rude. I was a math teacher for most of my career, and I helped my students learn many skills that were helpful in their careers. But I've always been concerned about the skills not taught. I like to think of myself as being a logical person, and I tend to pass everything through the filter of reason, even things that most people take for granted. Maybe you can relate to me in that sense. One of the things I realized how vulnerable we've all become compared to our grandparents' generation. Let me explain. The most important and valuable thing in life is our time. It's our only real currency. We spend time at work and get paid for it. When you go buy a new car or a sofa, you pay with the number of hours you work to get the money you need. For any of the goods we possess right now, we paid with tiny bits of our lives. The shirt on your back, your TV, the device that you're watching the short video on. Money is nothing but valuable pieces of your time that you pay for the final goods you really need. Like food, for example. But during the time when our grandparents lived, people used their time in a very different way. They didn't keep most of it as paper money in the bank or plastic in their wallets. Instead, they kept it as long-lasting foods and other vital items inside their root cellars and pantries. Many of them had enough put away to feed their family for a whole year, sometimes more. That's what made them so resilient to any crisis, and why even at the height of the Great Depression, you would struggle to find a single American household that starved. But how many of us today have that kind of stockpile to fall back on? All we have is money and supermarkets, where we exchange that money for food and other essentials, which is okay as long as money keeps its value, and if a disaster disrupts our increasingly fragile supply chain. Otherwise, most supermarkets have only 3 days worth of food, which will disappear even faster when people begin to panic. But money is only good as long as people agree it is. It has no value of its own, and in a crisis, it quickly becomes worthless. You can't eat paper, but good, nutritious food that doesn't spoil will always keep its value, no matter what happens to the world around us. The bottom line is this: as long as you keep all your time stockpiled as paper, stocks, bonds, gold, or anything that doesn't have a basic survival value, you are vulnerable and may find yourself at the mercy of others. Most of us today rely only on what we've got left in the fridge, thinking we can always go buy some more. But that's a big mistake, as recent history has proven time and again. During the 1941 siege of Leningrad, over 2 million people were trapped inside the city. Boris Novakovic was one of them. As rations quickly plummeted for everyone, but especially for the old and weak, his fate looked sealed. But Boris was no ordinary old man. Like many of us today in the U.S., he didn't expect something bad would happen. But unlike common folk, he also knew that a wise man always put something away in times of plenty. Before the war, Leningrad was a lively city with a bustling economy. Food was both cheap and readily available on every corner, more or less like we're experiencing right now. So Boris, not a rich man by any means, was able to turn a small part of his tiny state pension into something more tangible. His neighbors used to mock the old fool behind his back as he haggled for a better price at the market. But despite that, Boris went on to purchase food items and over the years built an impressive stash. As the city turned wretched and money became useless, people started trading boxes full of jewelry, gold watches, and expensive fur coats for just small pieces of bread. Sometimes not even enough for a single meal. In contrast, Fat Boris, as he became known, did quite well for himself during the 3-year famine. He was actually pretty thin and only got that nickname because his well-fed body stood in stark contrast with the starving people flowing through the streets of Leningrad. He even helped others nurse themselves back to health. Food was often the best and only medicine needed back then. The story of Fat Boris is not unique or even that rare. In starvation-stricken Leningrad and throughout other crises, like our own Great Depression, you can always find a few others like him, prudent, wise folk, who by stockpiling the right foods at the right time were able to survive and help their families do the same. Many others starved, probably still waiting for government help to arrive. The best time to put food aside is now. If Boris had waited until the danger was near, he would have had nothing left to stockpile or barter with later on. He would have been no better off than the rest of his starving neighbors. Just as we won't be if we decide to wait until the last minute. There will rarely be any warning signs. Do you think people knew the stock market would crash even a day before it did in 1929, ushering in a 10-year economic depression? Or that millions of Chinese trapped inside Wuhan by their own government saw it coming until it was already too late? Of course they did. Chances are we won't see the next crisis before it hits us either. And when things go really bad, or even during a local disaster like a hurricane, one of the first things to vanish or become prohibitively expensive is food. So you need to stockpile it beforehand. But it has to be the right kind of food, nutrient-rich and long-lasting without refrigeration. That's because in no decent crisis did people suffer from hunger but still have electricity left. I know it's hard to believe, but the best survival foods still come from a time when refrigerators were a distant dream. Nobody has to reinvent the wheel. It's been done before and so much better too. So don't rush out and sink thousands of dollars into a freeze dryer just yet. And don't stock up on emergency food buckets, even if you find them on sale. They are nothing but a clever scam that gives you 1,200 calories a day, about as much as prisoners got at Auschwitz. They contain barely any fat, vitamins, or the protein your body requires to stay healthy and strong. Please don't go buy a pantry full of MREs either. Eaten for more than a few days, MREs destroy your gut flora and prevent your body from properly absorbing nutrients. All you really need are the lost foods that Boris and others like him survived on during dark times. The foods of our grandparents. The problem is that since refrigeration went mainstream, these foods have become almost lost to history. There are only a few old-timers scattered all over the world who still make and stockpile them in their pantries. The sad truth is, the knowledge of making these superfoods that saved so many lives will probably disappear with them. And neither we nor the next generation will have them in our times of need. That's why we need to save these superfoods before it's too late. With the help of a team of passionate historians and preppers from around the world, we were able to gather every recipe inside